Welcome, Kala. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing audio. That's great, Kala. We'll wait a few more minutes to see if anybody else shows up. Now, I think Millie is not going to be here immediately. I think Nemo said that too. I'm not sure if Nemo is going to get the message just yet. And then Kat, I feel like she's going to be delayed also. Do you know if there's going to be anyone else, Katla? We'll wait a few minutes for him, and we'll see what happens. Okay, we shall begin. Let's see what we got. So this is going to be September 1st, and we can bring up a national map here. And as you can see from this picture, there's London in the southeast, and then we're going to end up going to Cardiff, the capital of Wales, in the west, for an extra special location. Um, so we start off, I think this is Paddington Station. And if anybody has any questions, yes, exactly, Kella. So we will start off in Paddington Station, which hopefully you can see. Which will take Great West Railway, one of the many franchises that operates the rails in the UK. Basically, up until I think the 1970s. Oh no, well, like prior to World War One, the rail system in Britain was entirely privatized, and then you had different rail lines, which were different companies. Sometimes they consolidated into bigger companies, but they originally started off like a venture capital company would raise money just to go one particular line from city A to city B. And these got consolidated over time, and then during World War One, they were put under a national control for the war effort. They were semi-privatized again between the wars, and World War Two, they were fully nationalized. And then they remained nationalized until the 1970s, when they began to be privatized in the 1980s. And they got privatized as being franchises along certain areas or certain lines. These would run, according to certain regulations, um, and such. And I think the tracks themselves are publicly owned, but the train lines and trains themselves are supposed to be private company, but operating within a certain like contract for the government or something like this. And so Great Western Railway is one of such these companies. Now, recently, I think they got like sort of renationalized again. So who knows? But anyway, do we see any? We have they switched over yet? Have we switched over yet? Ah, here we are. Yes. Um. So Paddington is one of the stations in London, and it goes basically to the west um, of the country. And so here we are, and we're about to take a train out to Cardiff, Wales. And then once we get to Cardiff, then we're going to take an Uber out to a little town just outside of Cardiff called St. Nicholas, from which we will see something, which we'll get to there. Now, this happened just after I had begun to recover from having a cold for about a week, in my fourth week of being, or third week, I think it was the third week in London, which I was not able to do much of anything. And this was my first trip out since then. So here's the station, and welcome to Paddington. Here's some typical train goers. The Paddington Bear is at the station. It's interesting that the lady on the right has what appear to be trekking poles, like she's a hiker, but she doesn't have a very large backpack, so I find it interesting. Maybe she was going hiking somewhere. I don't know. Um, Here's some typical people at Paddington Station. Now, I believe originally these stations were open to the air, and then at a later date they built the vaulted arches to enclose it. This is one of the semi-high-speed trains they have. And it goes pretty fast, like 100 miles per hour faster. And we're coming in, and I believe the train in the middle, you see, is probably like a local train, so it's not high speed. Obviously, if anybody has any questions, um, I can feel those. Okay, so that's probably our train coming in. So now we're going to go through the countryside, westward towards Bristol, and then from Bristol we're going to head north and west to Cardiff. So here's our first real shots since leaving for Dover of seeing the English countryside. We are mainly going, I think, through the county of Wiltshire at this point. And we'll be returning there later on to see other special sights. Interesting that the windsock would seemingly indicate that there's an airfield there, like a very small airport. Wiltshire, as I would learn later, is very much the stereotype of the rolling English countryside, like gentle hills out to the horizon, not a whole lot of trees, rolling fields, farmers' fields, and such. That is very much Wiltshire. We see sheep and horses. Now I think this is Bristol, the main city in the west or southwest of England. Welcome, Nemo. We have departed Paddington Station, but we have not arrived in Wales just yet. Well, that sounds delicious, Nemo. That's fine, Nemo. You can't put this on mobile or something, Nemo? Like your phone or something. More Bristol, over the River Severn. Now the River Severn, we can switch over, is basically, if you see the map here, you see Cardiff, and there's like a river which is roughly at the border of Wales and England. That's the River Severn. Welcome to Cardiff. Cardiff Canolog. Cardiff Central. Cardiff Canolog. Cardiff Central, Great Western Railway. Cymru, Wales. BBC Cymru, or Cymru, however you say it. Cymru. Swydva Swydva ticket office. We are definitely a different country at this point. I am not going to attempt to pronounce that. Oh, okay, that's the game. One central square. Un square analog. Okay. Square. Or square. I have no idea how to pronounce Welsh. I'm not even going to. So we left the station and now we're waiting for an Uber to take us to St. Nicholas, which is about 6 miles outside of Cardiff. And we can look at a map. So you're going from London west, pardon me, to Bristol down here. And then we go over to Severn to Cardiff. And there's something special. You can see the markers around here. And there's St. Nicholas relative to Cardiff. Only about 10 kilometers, 6 miles outside of town. But no cycling. Dim sequel. Caution, slippery when wet. Kofol in Yantrig Panfon. Okay, no. No. Okay. Moving on. Moving on. And Steven Seagal is here to enforce the rules of the Seagull cartel. You have to supply crisps, or bad things might happen to you. But yeah, all right, Steve. Anyway, here's the river. I don't know what river this is. It's a good question, actually. Uh, this is the River Taff. Now, Cardiff started out as actually an English colony within Wales. It's not really a Welsh city. It's not usually. It's the capital Wales, but it's not really a Welsh city. Um, and so when William the Conqueror came around, and he took over England at first, but he didn't take over Wales just yet. But his successors, when they wanted to take over Wales, they created like a beachhead. They invaded a little bit, and then established a base of operations, and that became Cardiff, basically. Um, and it could easily be supplied from Bristol by water. And so it's not often considered like actually a Welsh city in that sense. Neither is Swansea. So let's go out here. But Cardiff is down here, and Swansea is up there. And that was sort of the extent of the English colony within Wales. So Wales is all of this, and the English kind of invaded as far as Swansea and created a coastal area they controlled, and from there they could power project into the rest of Wales. But these are Wales's two largest cities are often not considered like properly Welsh. In the same way that Edinburgh was actually originally a Anglican or Anglican, right, an Angle city, not really a Saxon, Anglo-Saxon, but the Angle city, and then later on it was traded to Scotland in return for Cumbria. Um, so even though Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland, it's considered almost like an English city within Scotland. Meanwhile, Cumbria, which was originally part of Scotland, is the probably see later on. I consider the most Scottish part of England. You really do, even though you're technically in England, you would notice. You really do think you're in Scotland in so many ways. Um, well, that's interesting, Leeks, yes, leeks are kind of like onions, I think. The River Taff. Cardiff bus. Bus. Cardiff. So bus is obviously a very difficult translation. Then we have some interesting street art here. This guy, but up here. Looks like it's displaying some old Welsh mythology, perhaps. Okay, we finally got a ride, and we're leaving town. I should say I started this trip relatively late in the day. Usually I'd start, you get to the train station by 8 a.m. at the latest. And this was more like mm, noon or afterwards even. So we're pretty late in the day, and that'll actually influence how the day goes later on. Unfortunately, I have to cut it short a little bit more than I would like to, as the sun gets set. But I just had gotten off the cold, and I was better than the day before, and then even like the morning until the afternoon, I got better enough that I figured I could travel. So let's go. These are probably some old industrial era row houses for workers back in the day. Penrith and Dinas Palace. Now, Palace is one of the um, predecessor kingdoms within Wales at one point. I think it's the original. I think it's like six, seven, eight kingdoms made up Wales. So Dinas Palace. Dean in most Gaelic languages has a sense of like a hill or a mountain. Din or Din. Din. So maybe the mountain of Palace. I don't know. Penrith. Uh, Welcome to the Vale of Glamorgan, home of National Elstefad. Wait, well, Croeso e Fro Morganan. Mm. And now we got dropped off. So basically, before we go any further, what we're gonna do, uh, well, I'll explain this in a moment. Yes, it's very much a tongue twister, Calla. Yeah. So let's read these placards, and then we'll see where we are exactly. Haunted Field Walk, Taith Kai Isbrid, St. Nicholas, Griffith Gardens, and St. Lytton's. 3.5 miles, optional walk. All right, I'll let you guys read that if you want to, but then we'll move on. You are here, and we are going, indeed, to Tinkenwood and St. Lytton's. Welcome to St. Nicholas. Please drive carefully. Okay, so let's look at a map for a moment here. So Cardiff is down here, and then St. Nicholas is along the A48 here, on the main road leading out of town. And St. Nicholas is like a very small village. It's like a main road, and there's a very small village in this area. Um, and then if you go up some of the side roads, like Dufferin Lane here, there's a couple rich houses, I'll just say, for maybe a mile. And then once you get past the mile, it's basically like a farm village. It's just farms and farmhouses for the rest of the surrounding countryside. Um, but the actual village of St. Nicholas is allegedly, I've been told, the most affluent postcode in the entire United Kingdom. This area has more rich people per capita than the entire country. And you would not notice it at first glance, because it really is just this tiny village in the middle of the countryside. It does not draw attention to itself, and it's outside Cardiff. It's not even England. I mean, it's like, and Cardiff is very much a kind of post-industrial, kind of glum, kind of rundown, grimy, grim a little bit, um, city. Not exactly. Let's just say London does not invest very heavily in Cardiff. Okay, in terms of anything, it's very much, yeah, not well taken care of. And then miles outside of town, you have the single most affluent postcode in the whole country. So I don't know, supposedly. Um, and when you're walking around, there are some not really big houses. They don't really have like big mansions in the UK. But if you look in people's garages or their their driveways and stuff, there are some very expensive cars in the driveways. Like every single car is some kind of Mercedes, or Ferrari or Bugatti, or it's all. There's a lot of Bentleys. Okay, this is the first time in my entire trip when I saw a Bentley. Um, and I saw multiple in this tiny little village in the Welsh countryside. Um, it's that kind of place. Um, so and that is like 1 mile from the road, and then once you get 1 mile from the road, it's just open countryside. Your stereotypical British English open countryside. Um, so yeah, so we went down Dufferin Lane with a couple houses, and then right farms. Also, I should say, if I had gone earlier in the day, it would have been possible to walk from St. Nicholas all the way down to the coastal town of Barry, and then see the Severn or Bristol Channel down here. I thought it'd be interesting, but I come down to Barry. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time for that. The day was, sun was setting too early and so on. So, um, that was not possible on that day, unfortunately. Well, I know some towns just down the road from where I am, Nemo, where there most definitely are quite a few Bentleys and Ferraris, and such on the road where I live. Yes, like Greenwich, and such. That is definitely where you would find that. Um, there's one part in Greenwich where there's definitely like a Bugatti dealership next to a Bentley dealership, next to a Ferrari dealership, next to all that, like in one little area, next to um, a Porsche dealership, and they're not selling like the cheap Porsches either. They're doing the $250,000 Porsches, like they're really high end stuff. They make like 20 of those per year, and five of them end up at Greenwich. So yeah, there is some of that around, right? If you know where to look. Um, okay, Nemo. See you later. You're just about to miss it, Nemo. So here, and then you just go up that road, and I followed up the road, and then there's one point, where I don't think I took a picture of it, but you go off the road. So what I used at this point, a lot of my off-road trips in the UK, is something called OS Maps, um, which is the Ordnance Survey Maps they have in the UK, which is like the official mapping agency. And if you get the OS Maps, and you have that subscription service, you can use it offline. You don't have to have cell service, which is pretty good when you're out in the English countryside where there isn't much cell service. Um, there isn't. Um, and it's very accurate. It has like every tiny monument and archaeological site and town and everything is on this map. um, every possible trail in the country, every possible pathway, it's all on most maps. So I use that to navigate. Um, and then you can use that to navigate what are called bridle trails. And the UK has this very extensive network of traditional walking paths to the countryside. Some of those, um, yeah, bridle trails, there's some other names to them. And the idea of those is, and they're officially protected by law, that if there is established to be a long-standing traditional path to the countryside, and it can be recognized, by official mechanism, then you can, um, establish this kind of path no matter where it goes. And even if it goes to private property, even if it goes to a farmer's field, even if it goes to somebody's backyard, if it's a traditionally recognized path, it is publicly accessible so long as you stay on the path. And this is one of the things I really took away from my visit there, which if you're fit enough to do so, I recommend anybody who visits the UK can do this. It's usually not possible to do this in most countries, but in the UK it's established in law. Um, that you can basically walk through to a limited extent through private land and farmers' fields and over the countryside and all this kind of stuff. As much as you like, as long as you stay on these recognized paths. Um, and I really got a lot out of doing that, like just walking through the countryside and seeing like the real country. And yeah, that was a fantastic experience. And just like getting off a train, like starting in London, going an hour or two out of town on a train or something, and then you get whisked to the middle of the countryside, and then you start walking through farmers' fields for a couple hours and come back to another train. Um, that is an interesting experience. That's like very few places you can do that in this world, but um, and of course it's a very safe country, so you can't just like walk through the countryside. Nobody's gonna molest you. Um, and very often there's like nobody around in these fields. There's like sometimes you encounter farm animals, sometimes you encounter sheep and horses and cattle. Very often there's nothing. I mean, you might encounter one or two people the entire day. Um, if that even. Um, it's a fascinating experience just to be sort of alone in the countryside like that, and you hear nothing but the rustling of the wind through the trees and insects buzzing about, and that's kind of it. I mean, maybe yeah, nothing but your footsteps, and you have to be careful where you walk so you don't step into animal droppings. And sometimes you're going through a whole field. I don't know. It was an interesting experience. I managed to do it a couple days, and this is the first day of that. And if you're able to do so, I would recommend anybody to make an attempt. Um, because that is interesting experience. Anyway, so that would be the first day today. And so now we're walking through the countryside. You just get off the road, and there's certain signs you can see on the fences and stuff, and you can know where you are. And you look at your app on your phone, and you know where you are, and you can tell, oh, this is the path. Um, so here we are walking through the countryside. Oh, here's the road actually, and then we're gonna get to the path in a moment. But yeah, that's all it is. Walking down a quiet country road. Tinkenwood burial chambers. Siamber Gladua Tinkenwood. Okay. And now we come to the field. And this is what it pretty much looks like. I mean, you're just walking through this. There's not a lot around. Oh, and then there's this interesting tree I encountered. And now you can see it off in the distance if you look very carefully. So I'm wondering if anybody can see it right now in this picture. So it's in a field with these power lines going overhead. And here we are. So this is Tinkenwood Burial Chamber, which as far as I understand it, may be arguably the oldest standing structure, freestanding structure in all of Europe. Um, the oldest building, if you want to put it that way, in Europe. It is estimated to be approximately 6,000 years old. Um, Now there's different parts to it that are built over time, but the main chamber is approximately 6,000 years old. Maybe it's an estimate, obviously. Now the surrounding, you see the smaller stones that surround it, that was built up during the Bronze Age and is something like 4,000 years old. Okay. Yeah. But in the beginning, Britain was inhabited by hunter-gatherers who came in during the last ice age. And then approximately 6,000, 7,000 years ago, there were Neolithic um, farmers from Anatolia in today's Turkey, and they went into Europe, first through the Balkans and then up the Danube to Northern Europe, and eventually they ended up in Britain. And they are associated with this stone monument building culture in Britain and the rest of Europe. And they lasted until approximately 2500 BC, at which point they were replaced by a Bronze Age culture, who was not able to replicate the kind of monuments they could build. Since the Bronze Age was never able to do the same thing. They could build like small stones, but not the big stones. Um, and pretty much the last act, if you will, of this, Anatolian farmer culture was Stonehenge. And so the Anatolian stone farmers they entered Britain from the north. You think they come from the south. They actually came from the north, apparently. It's the oldest monuments in the north and the very top of Scotland. And then as you go south, you get newer and newer monuments. And when they got to Stonehenge in approximately 2500 BC, that was the biggest thing they ever built. And they came to the south and then they stopped. And within about a century or two after that, um, that particular culture, like 90% of the male lineage from that culture disappears. So I will let you figure that what happened to that point. But so yeah. So this Bronze Age culture, which is associated with the steppe Yamnaya culture, out of what is today Ukraine and Russia, um, you know, displaced, let's just say, the megalith builders. Um, And so they were never building anything after that anymore, but they built Stonehenge, and that was the last act, basically. So they were here in the middle of their period, and so this is approximately 6,000 years old. All good, Nemo. So we have different eras within the same monument, obviously. So here's a side view. Again, the smaller structures are Bronze Age. The main burial chamber itself, which is also the largest. This is known as a what's it called? I can't think of the word here. Um, uh, I'm forgetting the name now, but it's the largest of its kind in the world. There are many of these kind of structures. They consist of three side walls, with one wall being open, and then there's a kind of a roof stone, all of which are nominally like one solid stone. Um, but one side is always open, and we don't know why it's open, to be honest. It doesn't, as far as I know, any consistency about which wall is open. Of course, the whole structure is very much aligned to the cardinal points. There's always north, south, east, west. But which wall is open is, I don't think there's consistency on that. It's unknown if this was originally buried and it's like a burial mound inside a burial mound and the mound got, eroded away or something, or if it was always freestanding structure. Nobody knows that at this point. Um, but there have been approximately, in 6,000 years, approximately 2 million day-night cycles have passed over this, which in British terms means this thing has been rained on approximately 2 million times. Okay. That's a lot of weathering, especially considering it's basically sandstone and limestone. Actually, I think it's limestone. Limestone does not behave very well under rain. It just melts away. Um, So it's surprising it's lasted as long, but it's pretty, yeah. Um, so it's the largest of its kind, and the roof stone is approximately, I think it's about almost 20 feet long, about 12 feet wide, and about, I think, 2.5 to 3 feet thick, and weighs approximately 25 tons. So we'll get to that in a minute. Here's the Bronze Age structure that was built later by people who came in and did not know what they found. So for context, when Stonehenge was built and when the pyramids were built, this thing was already 1,500 years old. There's also this some kind of cavity was built in the back of the structure. Nobody quite knows why. No burials were found in it, but um, I believe, now that I think about it, I could be wrong about this, but according to things I read, this pit in the back might have been almost like the original structure, and then other stuff get built on later, added later. But this might be the oldest part. There's no burials in it, so who knows what it's for. Um, and then the whole thing was under the massive power lines. And some of the side stone walls were, of course, eroding away to nothing, and eventually they become like separate stones and stuff. There was originally one, but erosion takes its turn. And now we're inside. Supposedly, if you sleep for one night inside Tinkenwood, you will be either be driven mad and crazy, or you will become wiser than Merlin or something like this. There's some um so yeah. I don't know about that. But anyway, the stone is very, very, very weathered. I mean, it looks really, really okay. It really seriously looks old. When I was there, it screams 2 million nights and 2 million days. You really do feel like that. It's like seriously old. Um, you just can't imagine what it's seen or what's done or what people have come and gone through this thing, but it feels very, very old. This feels extremely weathered. It has seen so many things. Yeah, and then here's a pano of it. Um, on the left, you see a brick pillar that was actually built in 1909 to support the roof stone when it was believed the stone might be in danger of collapsing, um, not being able to support its own weight. Most people would believe these days that that's an unfounded risk. It's actually quite strong. However, it was built there and it's still there and not going to remove it, of course. When the site was excavated in the early 20th century, they did find some graves underneath here, like assorted bones of up to 70 individuals, something like this, um, for various time frames. Um, but of course, the brick part is not original. On the right, you can see some smaller stone wall that is like the Bronze Age part, but not modern. And now we're looking out to one of the entrances. It was it was a it did have a definitely kind of a spooky feel to it. When you first approach it, it's kind of on top of a very slight hilltop. And there's a point where the crest of the hill obscures it as you approach it, and then as you get closer, it comes into view. And I will say it does make you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere at first, and the first time you see it, it really does feel like you've come across like the house of a gremlin or a leprechaun or something. I don't know, or some sort of I don't know, something not in this world. Um, and you almost slightly hesitate to approach it that you might encounter something you don't want to find. Um, it does feel odd, especially because there's nobody around. You are all alone in this field. Okay, there's nobody around. Um, yeah, and I don't know, it was a little weird, a little. specular. um, there is a little plaque explaining it. Um, However, it was pretty late in the day. It was like 4 in the afternoon or something by the time I got here. So there's nobody around, obviously, that late in the day. So maybe there's anybody in the middle of the day. I don't know, but and technically, the site closes at like 4 in the afternoon. I'm there like 4:30, so technically I'm there after hours. But there's nobody to enforce that, so it doesn't matter. But it's yeah, um, you definitely have the place to yourself. It's interesting. Um, Mostly my iPhone 11, and then I have a Panasonic LX10, which is a more serious camera, but it's still very portable. I could share you a link if you want to look at that. I do like the LX10. There's definitely things I don't like about it. Um, but overall, it's definitely better than your phone. I mean, unbelievably, it's definitely better than your phone. It's still relatively compact. Um, and I had a little belt pouch for it. I could just easily take it out of there. If you guys are interested, I could share a link, but it's the Panasonic Lumix LX10. Um, a lot of this, I will say, is typically going to be my iPhone though. Um, it's always going to be easier to use, honestly. And then you just have to like, know how to use some of the settings on there. You just don't take a picture. You know how to, right? Exposure, it's on. Um, and of course, some people will leave like little votive candles, which I encountered at a later site similar to this a couple days later. So yeah, there's always somebody here who has extra meaning to this place. Let's put it that way. Um, so they left some sort of message. I'm not gonna touch that. And candles. I'm not gonna touch that. I don't know what that's about, and I do not want to know what that's about. And at this point, we're roughly pointing south towards Barry at this particular picture. And every time I came to a stone, I had a little moment of remembrance for the stone. You just put your hand on it and commune with the stone for a minute. It's 6,000 years of who knows what happened here. The stone was placed here by human hands, such as my own, and to put one more hand on it is to be in that lineage, I guess, or something. I don't know. And this gives a good general idea of what it looks like underneath. It's a very large topstone. I mean, it really, it's the size of a small apartment. Um, and to the left, you can see whatever that pit was. That might have been the original purpose of this site. And you can easily see why they would put it here. Of course, it is on a rise, which basically overlooks all the surrounding area. And if there were no trees, I do think you could see Barry and the Bristol Channel from here. You're not that far. It's about 6 miles. Definitely within sight lines of this place. Um, Don't do that. And actually, if you follow the fence line, there is a path that goes down that way. But we weren't able to follow that day. So, this is definitely one of those things which I would come back to if I were to go back. I take more paths to the Glenmorgan countryside and explore this area a little more thoroughly than the 2 or 3 hours I effectively had that day. We move on. So the grand old tree in the middle of the field, all by itself. Probably like a farmer's shade tree for the animals. I'm sure that's what it is. Because, the countryside looks like this. So our goal is this fence in the distance. And you can't see it here, but there's definitely like that fence there. There's a little sign or plaque on the post that tells you that this is the next waypoint on the path. Otherwise, you're just walking through the farmer's field. And we encountered sheep. One of my goals for this whole trip to go visit the UK is to find English sheep. Unfortunately, I had to settle for Welsh sheep on my first visit, but that's okay. um, but I was determined to encounter sheep. On my second day in the country, when I went to Enfield, I was trying to walk from where I was staying in Shoreditch as far north as I could get, and then like leave the borders of the city, perhaps, and then get to the countryside and find sheep. Unfortunately, I never got quite that far, but I so ever since day two, I was determined I was going to find sheep. And so by whatever this was, probably like day 16 or 17, I finally encountered my first sheep. Now, sheep are, in my experience, pretty curious animals. They're very interested in humans. In a lot of ways, they'll approach you if you enter the field. Um, but they do leave a lot of droppings on the ground, which you have to constantly be dancing around if you don't want like lots and lots of sheep droppings embedded in the soles of your shoes. So, but they're very inquisitive and interesting. Yeah, they're interested in you. Unlike cattle, which are wary of humans, and are genuinely scary to walk next to because they can stampede and they can kill you. If sheep stampede, they can't kill you. So, um, and I just can't imagine sheep ever stampeding. So they're not that kind of animal, in my experience. We'll Yes, we'll encounter more sheep when we get to Penrith in the north. There are lots and lots and lots and lots of sheep up there. More than you can possibly imagine. And some cattle, which I will maintain a very respectful distance to. Meanwhile, back to our sheep. Bah, bah. They actually respond to that, by the way. They get curious when you do that. Where your woolens come from? Hello, Mr. Sheep. Nice to meet you. It looks like you recently had a haircut. And here's a typical path you could go on between two farmers' fields. Start down here, and yep. And there's a gate in the distance. That's your next checkpoint. And then I encountered this little stream, little bridge, probably built during the Victorian era or something. I don't know. Could be 200-year-old bridge between farmers' fields and this little stream that goes between farmers' fields. I wondered how long the stream had been there. It's probably thousands of years old. People have been walking down this path once in a while the entire time. Roman times, pre-Roman times, King Arthur went past here. During the Middle Ages, somebody walked past here after learning that William the Conqueror had come. And then maybe somebody in Shakespeare's time and Victorian era, and there's always been somebody down this way. But this path, I'd be surprised if more than a few people in a year go down this way. It's very quiet, very, very quiet. Nobody around. You have the countryside to yourself over here. There's a creek like this near where I live. Reminds me of that. It's very seasonal. And we have a bridge similar to this. I determined on this day that every significant tree I walked past, especially if it was alone, I would commune with the tree. So you just give it a minute and you think about the tree. You don't think about anything else in the world. And then you thank the tree for being there. And you move on. So there's this wood. So the trail I was going on, you could take the main route where I was going, but then there was a side route that went through this very dark little patch of woods in there. But it was very clearly a trail that went to there. And it was kind of on private land, so I don't know if it was the best idea to go over there, but the trail went through there, and I don't know. But I walked up to the edge of this wood and looked like the property line on the map. And there's this sign. Danger! Gruffalo Forest. Beware the Gruffalo. Okay. I don't know, but we will go to the Gruffalo Forest. I promise. Yeah, this is pretty much, that's actually the tree where, and then I go. Looking behind us. Yes. I mean, sheep are pretty dirty in some ways. Their wool attracts absolutely everything. They have little turds coming off their back end and stuff. It never goes away. Um, but yeah, they're pleasant creatures. So a little bit on the smelly, dirty end of the spectrum, but yeah, they're very gentle. That's for sure. With yeah, I did encounter I think one other person this day. It was a jogger, probably from town. Okay, he was jogging through this area, and some horses. And this all was around a little before dusk. So the lighting was particularly good near golden hour. But the sun was going to set in like 90 minutes. So I had to kind of wrap it up pretty quickly. Um, I had like 2 hours left of sunlight. But, and then I encountered this horse. This guy was pretty small, his little pony, all by himself in this little field. I encountered him. And as soon as I came by, he got curious with me and walked over. I think he was kind of lonely. So he was in his field all by himself. He was eating what he could find. And He came over to me, so I gave him a pet. He would like that. Uh, he did seem a little bit neglected, um, kind of covered in flies, and his hair was not a little matted down. You can see it was like full of stuff, and I don't know. He didn't seem entirely cared for, unfortunately, and he's kind of lonely, I think. So I gave him a pet. And then when I had to walk away, eventually, he kind of walked after me, poor little guy. But he wanted to come with me, and I said, I can't come with me, little guy. Which I like to, but you can't. I can't bring you on the train back to London. So eventually, he only walked away when I was like 30 feet away. Like, it took a while to convince him I was going to come back. Um, but yeah, you can see all the flies on him, unfortunately. Poor little guy. Okay. Hmm. Okay, sorry, guy. I gotta leave. Doesn't like that. I know, Nemo. I know. That's that could be referencing. Sorry, buddy. All out. Anyway, continuing on our path down the winding country road. St. Lithan's burial chamber. Sign Lithan. You don't gotta translate that. Alright. So this is the second burial chamber on our tour today. This is about the same age as Tinkin Wood. It's about 6,000 years old. And it is the second largest. I'm forgetting the name of what they call it, but um, I forgot what they're called again. It's the second largest of the category. Most of these are very small. They're like a large box, like 2 feet cubed or 3 feet cubed. This is 6 foot cubed. It's a lot larger. Um, and it's on a very slight hill. Unknown if the hill is artificial or not. And then the hill is entirely on private land, but you can go onto it to access this. Um, and so you open a gate and you go through the field, and there's a big herd of cattle there on one side of the field, and they're kind of, you know, eyeing you suspiciously, as cattle seem to do. Um, and I'm a little wary about them. You don't want them to come too close. If they get nervous or something, right? You want to put distance with the cattle. Um, so anyway, this is quite large. And again, nobody knows if it was really buried and it was like a burial chamber or it was like always this way. I don't know. Um, and St. Lithan is named for a local church, which is basically not extant anymore. And it's some sort of local saint. We don't quite know much about them, who St. Lithan was, but they're very early on in Welsh history. Some very, 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 very early Christian saint, and we know basically nothing. And the main way this survived is under the idea in the Middle Ages that it was the burial chamber of a saint, so it couldn't be touched. And if it wasn't the burial chamber of a saint, it probably would have been pillaged for its stones long ago. That's a good thing. Even if they falsely attribute it to a saint, at least preserves it from being destroyed. Um, Obviously, there are many, 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 many more of these things in the distant past, and they basically got, you know, scavenged for parts over the years, and only through stories were they able to be preserved. So, And there's our piker who's coming the other way then. You can see in the corner here. This guy. Yeah, he was doing something else. All right. And now you can see in the lower right corner here is a cow patty. Cow patty. Those are quite large. They're about a foot in diameter, and you have to be very careful not to step on them. And they are everywhere in a field containing cows. So right up to the burial chamber, the cattle will come and deposit their cow patties to fertilize the field. So there's a herd of cattle off in the distance with a setting sun over the valley of Glenmorgan, which is the most productive agricultural region of Wales. So, it's an obvious target for English invasion. Um, you take their farm fields, and then you conquer them. That stone is sat on top of the other stones for 6,000 years. Kind of hard to imagine, but before the first city of Ur was built, before the pyramids, before Stonehenge, many, 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 many years before all that, this was. It's been sitting there the whole time, sitting there and witnessed all of human history. Every single thing you could imagine ever happened. This is out there. It's been unmoved in that time. Some very ancient ancestors put this up. We don't know much about them, but this is the legacy they left us. Now, as you saw from this picture, there is a hole drilled in the back stone wall that happens to face just due east. Um, and since we had a setting sun that day, it actually could get the sun to poke through it, and it produced this amazing light that sort of illuminated inside the chamber. It's actually pretty dark in there, but then the sun would pass through it like that. And yeah, you could actually see those rays. It was like it focused the sun rays into this chamber. It's interesting. And this is large enough you can stand up inside it. It's quite large. And then you commune with the stones, of course. Give it a moment of silence and let them speak to you. But it's getting late, and we have to move on. It is interesting how it's not so weathered on the inside, but definitely is much more craggy on the outside. And they're eyeing me warily again. That must be where they stay the night. Well, that's where cheddar cheese comes from. Do you guys know that the cheddar cheese originally comes from Cheddar, England, the town right around Bristol? And those are the kind of cattle they use to make the milk to make cheddar cheese. In the Cheddar Valley. Meanwhile, we're now entering Green Acres. The thing on the bottom is a cattle, I guess the barrier. So the cattle, because they have hooves, can't walk over those tubes. Um, and so vehicles and humans can walk over that, but animals can't. That's a way of controlling animal access to an area. We'll encounter that many more times in the future. And that's where he came from, basically, that field over there, that path. Now, there is a garden you could visit. Obviously, it's well after hours at this point, but it's part of the larger visitor center around here. One thing I did find interesting about my visit to UK is there isn't very many bugs. I don't know what it is about that place, but there are vanishingly few insects, at least buzzing, flying insects. Normally, if this was the US and I went to a situation like this, place like this, you would be swarmed, at least where I live, you'd be swarmed by insects. You would just be covered in insects. You would be applying so much insecticide all the time, it would just be unbelievable. But in this country, you could quite easily just seemingly park your butt somewhere, camp out somewhere, and there'd be no bugs. I don't know what it was, but you couldn't hear them, you couldn't see them. There's just no bugs in this country. I mean, there's some stuff on the ground, but even then, there's like very surprisingly few insects in this country for some reason. England famously has no native snake population, um, for whatever reason, but it's been noted since antiquity. Now, unfortunately, now there are snakes in England because people bought pet snakes and then they released them, and now there's like pythons in some parts of the country. But there's no native snake population. And apparently, there's not a whole lot of insects either, which I don't know how their plants are pollinated or I don't know. Very strange. It's uncanny. So that the countryside can be very, very, very quiet because there's no buzzing insects of any kind. There's no like crickets chirping in the evening, probably. I never did that exactly, but yeah, there's no insects. It's very strange. It's like a sterilized countryside. There's a park where I live where you can go hiking, and that place too. There's no insects, or very few at least. It's very strange at times to go in there, and there's no birds in this park either. So you go in there and it's quiet. There's no birds chirping. There's no bugs buzzing about. There's no, other than maybe like squirrels rustling in the underbrush in that park, and there's no people. If there's no people around, there's no noise. It's very weird. It's spooky. And this reminded me of that. Um, like all their small wildlife is just absent for some reason. Now it was definitely getting on to golden hour. Yeah, no, this is facing west. I should say. Okay. Uh, Different. Going back into town. It's Bob, the one pigeon who circles the entire world by going back in time. So Bob here was waiting for me at the place I had scheduled the Uber to pick me up. At this little crossroads on a major road in this little village in the Welsh countryside. And this is basically the kind of place they would pick you up in. Actually, I think it's a side road. That's the side road. Yeah, but those houses up there, yeah, there's some very expensive cars and driveways to those houses. So here's a typical Welsh license plate. Retail Park. Park Manworthu. Or Manworthy. Heading back into Cardiff. Give way. Giveaways yield in that part of the world. They have different ways of saying things. Yes, Simri. Now we're at the train station. Down. Lower. Down. Dim. Min. Minedian. Minediad. Minediad? Oh my god. Dim. Minediad. No entry. Goful. Earth. Goful. Earth got me. Mind the gap. I cannot pronounce Welsh. Tokinao Heb Al Tulu. Unpaid fares. Caradid catalog. Apparently, in Welsh, the word lift, elevator, is lift. With an extra F. Lift. Okay. Welcome to the first class lounge. Lift e plataforma errol tuar tanlor bar. Lift to the other platforms via subway. Okay. Well, Virginia, we're no longer in England, I don't think. I don't think we're in England now. Anyway, and then Great West had these very interesting looking trains. I think this was actually like a kind of a luxury train. You paid a little more, you got better views and or something. I forget what it was, but there was this special train they had. This was the special train. It was like a scenic train or something. I don't know. Like a tourist scenic train, not just commuter train. Now we have to figure out where you're going. Immadawidal Tudalan, one auto. In Mind, yeah, in Minde, Plat Dis Willow. Abertawa, Seradic. Lundane, Paddington. I wonder where that is. R. Umser. Merthyr Tudful. Bus. R. Umser. Harbor Portsmouth. I don't know where that one is. R. Umser. Penarth. R. Umser. Carefully. R. Umser. Trefglin Ebwe. Sirad. Must be like Welsh Rail or something. Oh boy. Oh boy. So I actually have some Welsh announcements we could try to play here. You guys want to listen in. So let's see if we can get this to work. Actually, let's do it this way. No. Um, oh, You got that, guys? No. Let's see if we can do something here. So I'll move this over here. And then this. See if we can. Woo. That's Flashing back. What are we doing? Don't do this. Don't be a little bitchy bitch. Come on. Okay, this. And then transition, yes. Why are we getting this? I don't get it. Okay. Go to here. And then transition. No, we're not transition. Okay. does not work. Okay, ignore that for now. So next on our agenda, okay, we can have a couple more slides here. Okay, guys, let's see if we can make this work. Come on, you can come on. Okay, I'm not doing that anymore. Not that. This thing is sometimes so slow. Okay, we're in here. Okay. So now, that was September 1st. September 2nd, the day after, we decided to go on a little journey. A bit quieter than all the way else. And this is on the Victoria line, I think it is. This is the newest train on the underground. And they have all this fancy new stations and everything. And one of the fancy things they have are these new, bigger um, trains, which have like a continuous walkway where all the cars are interconnected. And you can walk down the entire length of the train as like one big train. Um, so that was they're trying to do it in New York. They have these new R211 trains that are supposed to work like this. And then for whatever reason, they're not going to do that now. They're like cut off each of the cars so people can't walk between them anymore. Even though they specifically bought this new type of subway car to enable to do this, but then they're not going to do it. It's very New York. Spend all this money and then you backtrack and stuff. Anyway, so yeah, you can just walk all the way down. Here's some typical, um, 500-foot long train or whatever it is. Some typical Londoners. Found this to be a very typical London scene. How you guys doing? You still with me? Nemo, Catla. And so I decided this late in the stage, now that we're more than halfway through, or actually 3/4 of the way through being in London, I've been entirely in like South London and East London. I've never really been to the West End. That's not really my scene, but we should visit the West End a little bit. So I decided this day to go to the West End. And we ended up on Goodge Street, which is a very typical West End part of town. And then we have an interesting statue. So this is Piccadilly Circus. I'm sure we've all heard of it. And a circus, as I've explained before, is like this circular street with buildings built in a continuous line on into a like continuous pattern like this, all the way around. So there are actually some side streets, but they go like underneath the buildings. Um, and yeah, it's Piccadilly Circus. I remember on this day, it might have been something else. I came to this area, and it was a clear day out when I went underground, and then I came above ground, and it was torrential rain. It was like the heaviest day rain I had counted the entire trip. I was not prepared. I got soaked, completely soaked. As you were going above ground. And I remember like standing in line and like all the shops around there are completely full. People are trying to like run indoors to get out of the rain. And the best I could do, you had to stand in line at the M&M store. And it took like 20 minutes being soaked outside just to get inside the M&M store just to have shelter. Um, Man, this is a very super kitschy tourist area, obviously. So here's a side street. I like finding the side streets. On Vine Street in the city of Westminster. This is a little alleyway. Kind of interesting. And then this. And then back of the alleyway, there's all these big tall buildings, and there's this two little 3-story building in the back. And then there's like this almost garage that goes underground to gain access to it. Makes you wonder what's going on back there. All these tall buildings, and there's one little, you know, building that sticks out at the end of Vine Street. Mhm. There's a lot of places like that in New York where you have these huge skyscrapers, and they surround this little tiny 2-story building somewhere downtown. Um, and you gotta wonder who the holdout is who has this little building who never wanted to sell. Pall Mall, City of Westminster. Quebec. Mm, that's Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square. And it's getting into evening by this point. This is pretty much like the center of town in a lot of ways. Center of London. This is the main gathering area. It's almost like Times Square to London. Um, all the major protests happen here, and this is where people gather for major public events or announcements or whatever. Um, a very large crowd. Guys, are we? We should have. We should be transitioning. And what's going on? Are we? Okay. Get rid of that for a minute. Oops. Get rid of that. Uh, get rid of that. There we go. I think this is Charing Cross, which is the official center of London, and the point which, in theory at least, all the roads in England are measured from. It's like that 0 mile point. Charing Cross is named after a cross which was put here, I think, by one of the English kings when his wife died. To memorialize her, he put a monument here, similar to Taj Mahal kind of story, and that became like the center of town. And that's like 1 block over from from Trafalgar Square. And so it's disputed. There's the kind of official center of London, and there's the unofficial center. And of course, then all of this is outside of the actual city of London, which is the historical center. So London has multiple centers, depending upon how you count these things. I think this might be like the Waterloo Bridge or something like that, near Waterloo Station, which is near Trafalgar Square. Oh, all right, so that's basically it for this. And then, yeah, for next time, we're heading back out to the countryside, but for a very different place. Right? Yeah. Okay. Wait a minute. That's that? Yeah, very different place next time. All right. Yeah, it's going to get interesting in the future. All right. Okay. So, if you guys have any further questions or anything else, otherwise, we'll call it a day. Good night, Nemo. Good night, Kella.